Welcome everyone. My name is Dina Rollinger. I am one of the Associate Deans for the College of Social Sciences and Public Policy at Florida State University. I am very excited to welcome you to our second Wicked webinar that we have hosted. We hosted one last semester which focused on research that's ongoing in the college relative to COVID. And this, our second, features work that's being done in our community, Tallahassee, Florida. So I did get a question about the choice of Wicked webinar. So I just wanted to explain it really quickly. So when we talk about social science problems, they are called, we often call them wicked problems with wicked solutions because of the complexity of the issues that social scientists deal with. We also have a blog that we named with the same title that features some of our ongoing work as well as teaching that we do in the classroom. This evening, I am so very excited to welcome not only one of our great assistant professors in the college, but also some community leaders. And I will let Dr. Holmes introduce our community leaders, but I wanted to give an introduction to her. So if you're unfamiliar with our setup for this, how we typically do things is if you have a question or comment, please use the Q&A function. Regardless of the screen you have, you should see a Q&A bubble at the bottom, and you can put in a question or comment at any point in time. We will have a conversation that will be moderated by Dr. Holmes for about 45 minutes, and then we'll have 15 minutes for question and answer. We will also have the ability to unmute you. So during that time, you can also raise your hand. But let's get going on the program. I'm so pleased to introduce Dr. Tisha Holmes, who is an assistant professor in our nationally ranked Department of Urban and Regional Planning. Her research, which is what she's discussing tonight, is community-based. And what that means is she engages in these really intensive programs that are designed to promote grassroots capacities through community outreach and participatory engagement. And so she's going to start us off and introduce us to our distinguished guests who are from the Tallahassee Providence Neighborhood Association, which will also be referred to as PNA this evening. And I am pleased to turn it over to Dr. Holmes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dean Erlinger. Good afternoon, everyone. Very happy to be with you here. Welcome to our friends, our partners, our neighbors who are in attendance today. Before I just get started with the introductions, I'd like to take a quick moment to thank Dean Erlinger, Dean Chapin, Rob Nixon, and all at the college for helping facilitate this opportunity for us to get together and engage and learn about neighborhood planning efforts in Tallahassee. So now I want to extend a very warm welcome to the Providence Neighborhood Association leaders. Thank you very much for joining us as panelists to spotlight the very important work your group is doing to promote community action and equity planning in the Providence neighborhood. And I sort of want to turn the floor over to you to take 1 minute to introduce yourselves and sort of talk about what your role is in the Neighborhood Association. Mr. Harris, would you like to go first?
Yes, my name is Leslie Harris. I have lived in the Providence neighborhood since 1993. I own a home in Providence, and I was the first Neighborhood Association president. Thank you.
Great. Walter?
Good evening, I'm Walter McDonald. I am the current president of Providence Neighborhood Association. My father, along with Doug Douglas, started the Crime Watch back in 1996. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Ronnie?
Hi, I'm Ronnie, and I was president. I'm a past president, and I moved into Providence neighborhood in 2007 when I bought my home, and I have been working amongst the lovely people of Providence ever since.
Great, thank you. Monet?
Hi, everyone. My name is Monet Moore. I've been involved in the Providence neighborhood since about 2015, 2016. So I'm just really happy to be here and just a really avid volunteer.
Wonderful. We are very grateful to have you all here and looking forward to a really engaged conversation. So just to get us started and orient us a little bit, Dean Rollinger mentioned that a lot of my work is around community-based action research, and you know, community-based action research is really working at the local and the neighborhood level, often in partnership with community groups and their partners to co-produce research, right? That integrates the community knowledge in order to develop locally appropriate interventions and solutions that can then inform broader and enhance broader decision-making and planning processes. So it's really a way to democratize who generates knowledge and shares power and agency with communities in the production and reproduction of knowledge. Now, planning has a tradition of emphasizing partnerships and collaboration to shape plans and policies and decision-making through things like negotiation and deliberation and consensus building, as well as implementing those plans through cooperation and coordination. So when we talk about promoting collaborative or equitable planning and engagement, we're aspiring to move up what is known as Einstein's ladder, moving from just informing or consulting with the community to the higher rungs of collaboration and empowerment. But you know, what happens in theory, what we talk about in theory isn't always what we talk about in practice. So that's oftentimes not very easy to do because it's challenging to balance different interests, to navigate conflict. It's a challenge to continuously seek collective solutions while maintaining trust in the process. But it's really essential, especially given the world that we're living in now, that is way more diverse than we've ever known it, but also very polarized. And also the gaps between the haves and the have-nots continue to widen. So planners are called ever more to address the injustices of past decisions and advocate for restorative outcomes in communities that have been historically excluded from having a seat at the decision-making table. And they can do that by connecting different stakeholders and partners to work in a shared vision to not only develop more vibrant communities, economically vibrant communities, or environmentally sustainable communities, but also socially equitable communities. And I think community-based action research can help expand those capacities and opportunities to pursue those ideals. So these threads connect in a recent paper that I've done with Dr. April Jackson, who is my counterpart in the Department of Urban and Regional Planning, and Dr. Tyler McCreary, who's a faculty member in geography. The Gown Goes to Town paper really tracks the three of our community engaged courses that supported the City of Tallahassee's Division of Neighborhood Affairs Neighborhoods First initiative in the Griffin Heights neighborhood. So this was a collaborative partnership between DERP, the Griffin Heights Neighborhood Association, and Neighborhood Affairs. And the students went out and helped collect community survey data. They curated oral histories. They supported community meeting facilitations to help the community members envision their goals and their priorities, and then realize those goals in visuals that we can see here on the slide to be included in their neighborhood plan. So we took a similar partnership approach in Providence before the pandemic changed the face-to-face dynamic. And in each of those cases, the students really came away with a deeper understanding of what goes into a neighborhood planning process. But the city's capacity as well was also expanded to undertake a broader engagement strategy. And the Griffin Heights community was able to formalize their ideas, formalize their priorities and strategies into a plan in order to guide future development. What we also learned from that is that when engaging in these types of partnerships, we really have to take care to not exacerbate existing disparities in the community, to engage in a culturally competent manner, and to continually take these reflexive pauses to ensure that we continue to center equity at the core of the partnership and equity in the process. So without further ado, sort of want to introduce you to the Providence neighborhood. You can see Providence here on the map in blue. It's nestled in a prime location between FSU, FAMU, and Innovation Park. You guys have already sort of introduced yourselves, but we'll talk a little bit more about the Renaissance Plan, which is the document you see on the left, and sort of move towards the Neighborhood First Plan or Refresh, which is the document on the right. So let's talk about what we're going to start our conversation with here. We're going to start talking about the evolution of PNA's planning processes and talk about their partnerships, as well as the challenges and opportunities in sort of managing those partnerships, and then wrap up with lessons learned. So the first question is, tell us how PNA has engaged in planning processes over the years. Mr. Leslie, would you like to start?
Certainly. We first engaged the city's planning process in 2002. Prior to 2002, we worked issues with other city departments. First, as a neighborhood crime watch, as Walter mentioned earlier. Also, he mentioned that it was formed in 1996. Neighborhood.
Mr. Harris, I think there's a little bit of a lag and you were on mute. Can you repeat that?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. We first engaged in the city's planning process in 2002. Prior to 2002, we worked on our issues with other city departments. First, as a neighborhood crime watch that was formed in 1996. Walter mentioned that earlier, because crime was a major issue that brought us together. In 1998, we formed a neighborhood association because we felt that would help us to better address all of the other issues that we had identified up to that point. Other city departments that we worked with during this period included the Tallahassee Police Department, Solid Waste, Code Enforcement, and Parks and Recreation. In 2002, we heard about the Community Neighborhood Renaissance Partnership, which was an organization the city and county used as part of their neighborhood planning process. We applied to the Renaissance Partnership that same year, and we were selected to be the second neighborhood to participate in that process. Out of that process came a comprehensive neighborhood plan that was approved and adopted by our neighborhood association in October 2003. The plan was also approved our plan was also approved by both the city and county commission after we approved it. The plan identified our major issues of concern and developed strategies and goals to address those concerns. Constructing a community center in or adjacent to our neighborhood was the #1 goal we wanted to achieve. Increasing home ownership in the neighborhood was also an important goal. We began to implement the plan more fully in 2004, but our neighborhood leadership changed that year. Reverend Roger Wells became our second neighborhood association president. He continued to move forward with our plan, and some of the things that occurred under his leadership included the construction of several homes in Providence that were to be used for home ownership. The Delta Kappa Omega Foundation, which operates our community center now, first began to reach out to the city of Tallahassee and to Providence to see if we wanted to partner with them to build a community center. Lastly, Providence completed the Providence is Listening project in 2007. That project was completed to try to increase participation in our neighborhood association. Also, a survey of neighborhood residents was conducted as part of the project to find out what the issues and concerns of the neighborhood residents were at that time. The survey results reinforced many of the issues and concerns that had been identified previously in our neighborhood plan. And then, as Reverend Wells' tenure ended, we then transitioned on to Rahni Wright's presidency. Thank you.
Great summation, Mr. Harris. Ronnie, you want to pick it up from there?
Yeah, so after, so when I became the president, I was just kind of new to the neighborhood and not really aware of all of the things that needed to be done for the neighborhood. So when I was asked to be president, I was also given the plan and said, this is what you're supposed to do. And so for me, the planning process was really about executing the plan. And so that meant carrying out things that had been dictated prior to me becoming president. So we ended up doing a little bit of tweaking with some zoning, and then we also actually realized the public-private partnership of the community center, which was a really big deal. We got an award for that. I think the city got an award for that. So that was a really nice moment for us to go and do that. Then also we were lucky to have a lot of advocacy in regards to some of the buildings that were not being used in our neighborhood utilized. And so we have also welcomed in the Big Bend Homeless Coalition for their apartment complex for formerly homeless veterans. And again, these were all things that were taking place because they were already in the plan. And I think what we learned was that we needed to continue to engage with the city and other government bodies, but also to engage with private partnerships. And so that became a really big portion. It was prior to me being president, but also a big portion while I was there. And so a lot of our partnerships really have become, our plans have become things that we can execute with people on a private level. Now we are continuing our formalized planning process with the city of Tallahassee currently. We have the opportunity to do the neighborhood first process. But prior to that, Walter became president. And when Walter became president, we went through a few more things. Again, private partnership on the community garden, but also public at the same time because it was the city of Tallahassee's property. And then we also decided to create or co-create a corporation. So we do have our private PNA corporation, which doesn't belong to Providence Neighborhood Association. It is separate and apart from us, but we work closely together for the purpose of redevelopment with our own internal processes. But again, to move on to the current process, we're now looking at the plan as we did it originally. And there's an opportunity for us to create specific development in coordination with the city. And through that process, we have to then analyze our plan. And instead of creating new points for us to start off and do something new and unique, we've decided that we're going to actually take the entire plan and see how we can analyze it for current execution. And that also includes creating an opportunity for some new ideas and some new ways of making the old things that we'd like to have happen occur.
Great, thank you, Ronnie. We can see that there's so much work just from this very small timeline that doesn't capture all of what has happened with Providence. But there's also this theme of continuity, I think, in terms of PNA's journey to advance your community goals. And I think that strength really lies in cultivating and keeping the leadership going and sustained over time and finding these, diversity of partnerships to build on and mobilize in the community project by project. All right, so next, let's switch the slide. Right, we kind of see that there are a range of different types of partners that PNA works with. This graphic looks at a few of them that were mentioned here, but not all of them. It's not an exhaustive list. And as we said, PNA has a long history working with the city of Tallahassee, but they've also sort of stepped out beyond the public realm and developed other types of partnerships with other stakeholders in the community. So I want to take a little bit of time to sort of talk about those partnerships. Let's take a sampling of the success stories. Mr. Harris, if you can tell us about how some of these partnerships were formed and what made those partnerships successful.
Yes, thank you. Um, our, our, our partnership with the Providence Baptist Church has been one of our most productive ones. That partnership has played a critical role in our association's existence and success. One of the two neighborhood association founders, Reverend Walter McDonald, and two of our association presidents came out of that church. Other church members over the years have also played active roles in our association and in our activities. The church served as our base of operations from the time we first organized in 1996 until our community center opened. That includes being the site where we conducted our association meetings and hosted neighborhood activities. After the center opened, the church still served as a backup facility for meetings and hosting activities. Even now, during the pandemic, we have used the church's parking lot to host 2 food distributions in recent months. Then another partnership that we have with the Trinity United Methodist Church has also been very productive. Trinity was one of the original members of the Renaissance Partnership when we went through the process. They have helped us in many ways over the years. When we first started to raise funds for the construction of our neighborhood center, they pledged $10,000 towards that project. When that first fundraising effort fell through, they continued to help Providence address other issues in our neighborhood plan. Over the years, for example, they renovated several homes in the neighborhood, started a Girl Scout troop. One of their members partnered with a member of the Providence Baptist Church to form a camera club. They started a book club. They helped with our neighborhood cleanups. They helped with our annual neighborhood fun day. They helped with our annual Halloween showcase event, and they currently support our community garden. The partnership, I believe, has been successful largely because of Trinity's commitment to helping the larger community. The partnership has also been successful because one of their members, Ms. Laura Chapman, became an unofficial liaison between our association and Trinity. In that capacity, she has attended many of our face-to-face association meetings and advocated on our behalf for the church to support our neighborhood. Ms. Chapman has also worked at our community garden most Saturdays since 2015. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mr. Harris. Walter, would you like to talk about the partnerships that you've established with Florida State?
Sure. I believe if you get anything from this conversation tonight, take this one. Relationships is the new currency. It's all about building relationships. When I came along as president, we had our annual fun day, which takes place in June. And I reached out to the College of Engineering to see if they could come and do some displays, work with the kids, and just show what they do at the College of Engineering. And they said, sure. And so they start coming for like 3 or 4 years. And then I reached out to them about doing other things in the community. And they were our first real partner at Florida State, was the College of Engineering. FAMU, Florida State College of Engineering, was our first partner. Then we heard about the new clinic that was being built on Eisenhower Street. And I reached out to the College of Medicine. We had conversations with them. And we sat on their board, their advisory committee there at the clinic. And they have become a great partner for us, especially during this pandemic. When we had reached out to them for different advice, they have always been there for us. So we have reached out to Florida State to be one of our big partners through my term.
Great. I am going to coin that phrase, no pun intended, relationships is the new currency. I'm going to use that. All right, Wonderful. So we have a great sense, and this is not, again, an exhaustive list of the success stories. There are many successes, but we just wanted to highlight some cases and tease out what elements sort of went into them being successful as partnerships. So now what I want to move on to is that we also know that there are, whoops, went a little too far. We also know that there are challenges when you're trying to build and maintain partnerships with a diversity of actors and interests and even personalities, right? And it's even sort of more elevated during times of difficulty, constraint, and stress. So I would like you guys to sort of speak to some of the challenges that you faced in terms of working with partners and how you overcame them. Monet, would you like to get us started?
Thank you, Dr. Holmes. So just in regards to some of the challenges we face when just collaborating with local partners is one thing that I always try to make sure that takes place is when interacting with our neighborhood and interacting with our neighbors is that realizing that we in the community are also valuable and we also have an experience that should be treated as it is valuable. So just making sure that when you collaborate with partners is that you have something to offer. So whether it be a nonprofit and they're trying to increase their reach, they're trying to increase the number of people that they give to or donate to or whatever, making sure that your organization is in a place to where you have that social connectedness to say, okay, well, maybe you're not reaching to this person because maybe just their conditions in their home is different or they work odd hours. And I think that's something that we have in our neighborhood that kind of makes us unique is that level of social connectedness. So knowing good ways to engage other people. So I think that has been one of the challenges that we've had to overcome, especially in COVID, and it just being a change in that, because typically you see a lot of people during COVID has switched to say doing these online platforms and sending out surveys via email, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I also think just realizing who our community is and knowing that not everyone is going to have Wi-Fi access or reliable internet in the home, making sure that whatever you do, you're doing that extra step to overcome those challenges, not just for your own organization, but then also organizations that you partner with.
Wonderful. Thank you, Monet. And Ronnie, would you like to take that question as well?
Sure. I think that one of the things that we've had to sort of realize is that some partners, sometimes the partnership doesn't look like it'll necessarily fit you and you have to sort of go in and readjust it. I think there's a good story on that. We now work with, we're now doing our food drives. And I remember when Walter was looking at the opportunities during COVID. So basically everyone had to do a drive-up food drive because of the way that COVID was working. And that didn't work for us. We don't have people who can necessarily drive to go get food. And so instead of just saying, okay, well, that's something that we're gonna miss out on, he contacted the Second Harvest and said, hey, can you do a food drop for us? And can we then distribute the food ourselves? And so we took that opportunity and we distributed like food to 400 different, boxes of food. That was a lot. That was really important during those early days. But then he took it a step forward and said, hey, again, driving up doesn't work for us. And now that you've changed it so that people can interact or can come to public spaces, how about we do a walk-up one? How about you make it so that we can do what needs to be done in order to have people just walk right up to us? And that was something that they were amenable to. They said, sure, let's see what we can do. Let's make this work. So instead of just looking at the face value of what something is offering, to take that and then to reshape it into something that actually will fit you. So I think that's one thing that you can do when things look a little bit challenging. I think another thing is that when people try to give you something that doesn't necessarily fit you, I think that's another aspect is a little different. You have to be really sure and confident about explaining what will work for you. So it's similar. But I think a good example of that is when FSU, you all were working with us in terms of making sure that we were going out and getting our survey information. And again, we are a walking community, and it's really, really hard to explain that to people because everybody just jumps in their car and drives to where they need to go. And when we say walk, we mean walk out your front door, past your driveway, to wherever you're trying to go. So when it comes to communications and things like that, that's also kind of the way that you have to communicate with people. And so when you all were coming to us and saying, we'd love to do these surveys, you came with all of the technical bits, like we have a, QWERTY key and we can do this and you just scan this. And we're like, you're just gonna have to walk up to the door, knock on the doors, see if they answer. You're also gonna have to go stand out in front of this store and this store and this store. And then we were able to get, those results. So it was really good that, you all were able to listen and adapt, even though there are other ways and more textbook ways or more technologically, viable ways of doing things. But if you listen to the people who it's supposed to serve, there are some very quick and efficient ways if you'll just do it like they say, because this is what works. So.
Absolutely. That was certainly a learning lesson that we will not forget anytime soon. So great responses. Sort of thinking through not only identifying what the potential barriers could be to reaching out to the community, but also being flexible, adaptive, and responsive to when the community is telling you, hey, this is the way that it will actually work. All right. So now what I want to do is take like a few minutes to talk through some lessons learned, right? We've gone through identifying how you've gone through the planning process over the years. We've talked about, successful partnerships, highlighted a few successful case studies, and then looked at the challenges and the ways that you overcame them, taking and leveraged those opportunities to overcome them. What are some takeaway lessons? I want to sort of focus on that right now, right? As you are moving into a new phase with the Neighborhood First process and the refresh, what are some takeaway lessons looking back retrospectively? And how would you advise either communities that are looking to mobilize and pursue similar paths or partners that are working with you right now and partners that would hope to work with you in the future? What are some lessons learned and takeaways? Who would like to take that? Let's see, Monet, how about that?
Thank you. I think one of our biggest takeaways or lesson learned over the years, especially as we reflect kind of on what worked and what didn't work as we go through this Neighborhood First plan. I think one of our biggest takeaways is vetting your partners, getting to know, making sure that you know them, making sure that they're a good fit, just making sure that they're just as committed to your neighborhood as you are, and just as invested in seeing the same thing, like seeing what you want to see either change or take place, but making sure that they value your community as they enter into it. So I think that's one of my biggest kind of like lessons learned. But then also I would want to say, for if you are a part of a nonprofit, if you are a part of a public agency, if you're a planner, or if you're anyone that's looking to partner with community, making sure that when you go to these communities that you don't value these communities as something that are a deficit, something that you're coming in to save. Just making sure that when you go into these communities, yes, you're going to better them, but also realizing that there's already a value there and you're only just enhancing that. So just making sure when you interact with people who are in the community that you truly respect them, but you're going to serve what their goals are and not just your own personal goals.
Right. Okay. Walter, would you like to jump in here?
Sure. I think the biggest takeaway is when you build that partnership and you go in, like they said, like our neighborhood, we have something to offer. These neighborhoods have something to offer. Don't think that you're coming in to be the great white savior, the hope of that neighborhood, because you're not. Listen to what the neighborhoods are saying. They're there for a reason. So please listen to the neighborhoods.
Great. All right. Ronnie.
Yeah. I think that one of the things that you can really look at is making sure that your partnerships are mutually beneficial. So again, if you think of it as if you're going in and you're doing something for someone, then that's not going to work. And if you are receiving and you're thinking that someone's just doing something for you, that's not going to work either. You really do have to understand that both parties are bringing something to the table. And we've managed to sort of put it into like actual tangible ways. So for example, when we do our Fun Day event, we always make sure that there's a piece of paper that exists that says who are all of our partners. You want to recognize your partners. You want to publicly recognize them. You want to utilize your social media and make sure that you are, letting people know who is actually doing the things that they're doing. But also, people show up for photos, and it's fine to give people photo opportunities because people want to go out. They want to be seen. Now, if you're feeling like you're being used or that it's an imbalance, then that's, something that you do need to consider. But generally speaking, it's okay for both parties in a giving situation to benefit. That's really, like someone gives you something, naturally in our culture, we say thank you. And so that's how we need to really kind of look at that. And so I feel that, that's one aspect. And another aspect is if somebody offers you something that doesn't fit you, don't take it. Like everybody I know is like entranced by the free t-shirts of the world that, get thrown out at ball games. But if it's not for you, if it's not your size, if it's not your color, don't take it. Leave it where it is. So make sure that you're actually, making sure that what you're getting or receiving actually fits you. And if it doesn't fit you, like it didn't fit us, see if it can be reshaped, see if that can be changed. So, yeah.
Great perspectives. Okay, so we got down to the end of our formal questions. I'm going to sort of throw it back to PNA and see if you all have any concluding thoughts or anything that you think we did not cover effectively that you want to talk about now.
We may just want to expound more on the questions that people ask. If there are no questions, then I'd be more than happy to talk, but I'd love to just give people what they're actually here for since we have so many people.
All right, great. Oops, sorry, I'm muted there. Definitely want to sort of open it up to our audience and then sort of like hone us in on some main takeaways. So I'm just going to sort of speak back to a couple of the themes that I heard here. The first takeaway, let's see if I can, there we go. The first bigger takeaway, I think, is planning with communities rather than for them, right? As you all sort of talked about today, communities really come to the table with strengths and a range of strengths and a range of assets that can be built upon, right? So that there is an explicit it should be an explicit orientation when you're undergoing a neighborhood planning process to view and engage with communities as equal partners, as equal stakeholders who have knowledge, who have capacity, and who have agency to contribute and move the plans or the projects or the initiatives forward. So setting that dynamic up front can dramatically shift the power relationship, right? And the communities can feel valued, they can feel heard, they're invested over the long term, long after the planning process is completed. And as a result, that partnership and that relationship becomes institutionalized and long-lived. The second theme I hear is the valuing of local knowledge, differences, valuing differences in knowing and differences in local lived experiences. I think that's also a really important takeaway. We as planners or sort of public practitioners are trained to be the experts, right? And trained to seek solutions. But sometimes we need to listen. We need to step back and listen, not prescribe answers or not close doors without exploring the potentials behind them. And that's really hard. It's hard to do in the reality of time constraints, money constraints, other pressures, especially when the conversations are difficult and there are conflicting interests or positions, or just there's just like misalignment and differences in the ways that organizations work. But I really sort of feel like we have to emphasize this listening component as an integral part, because that's how you validate and build balance and legitimacy in the partnership. It shows when you try to listen, even if you're at loggerheads, that you want to make this relationship and this partnership work. And I think that community-based action research can also build those types of connections and then open space for more dialogue and, you know, provide more incentive to seek shared and collective solutions. And then the final one is the building trust and mutually beneficial partnerships. I think those are key to sustaining, agree 100%, to sustaining positive and equitable planning outcomes. I think the collective is stronger than one single stakeholder, and there are tons of co-benefits that can be generated by building a varied partnership of networks, particularly because different partners have different skills, different spheres of influence, and different sets of expertise. But you know, I think my closing thought, I'm not going to ramble too much, is that if we want the relationships to work, we gotta do the work. So really coming to the table with a commitment to being transparent, to being respectful, to being truthful, and also humble, and being sort of orienting our ways of thinking to where can we seek those mutually beneficial outcomes, can really build resilience into the system, right? So that the partnerships can weather when, you know, times get difficult or that there's conflict, the partnerships can sustain and be and persist. And then it also makes, when you have successes, true collective wins for all. So I'm going to stop there. I think we are actually like right to 45 minutes, which is amazing. Great job, everybody. And let Dean Rollinger take the questions from the audience.
Great. Yeah, so just a friendly reminder, use the Q&A button, the bubble at the bottom. We have several questions in there already. Please use that rather than the chat, just so it's easier for us to keep track. In a little bit, you'll notice at the bottom, you can raise your hand. If you hit that, I will also try to make sure that we get to you as well. Before I get to the first question, I do just want to note that there was a lot of support in the chat and in the Q&A for our speakers and the work that they're doing, and just the importance of the partnerships that folks are involved in, that they're mutually beneficial, that there's recognition that all parties have value, and making sure that there's, you know, everyone is getting something out of this that helps the community. So I want to make sure folks know that we saw those and appreciate those comments. I'm going to start with Melanie. She since it's related to the research process, she was asking, she wanted to know, what does the research process look like and to find the best practices for these community-centered urban planning. So is there a list of best practices somewhere, or is this something that you develop? How does that work?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for your question, Melanie. I would say there are tons of best practices and lists that there. There are a number of successful case studies. So when we start sort of thinking through a community-based research process, it's often defined by what the community wants and what the other partners want, like say neighborhood affairs. But what we do is our pre-work, right? Like we try to scan the literature, the practice literature, as well as the theoretical literature, to identify what are the important elements that need to go into an effective neighborhood planning process or an effective sustainability planning process, whatever is the object of analysis. So we're scanning to see what is out there, what's been done. And it's not necessarily that we're trying to not create anything new or innovative, but a lot of the work has been done by a ton of different agencies, organizations, and in many different communities across the United States and across the world. So building upon that existing knowledge through doing literature reviews, but also connecting and understanding from the community partners what they have experienced, what they've seen, is how we then collate and sort of triangulate that information to then, you know, design a more formative research process.
Great. So we have several questions, so I'm going to put some of them together. So I'm going to kind of smush Jaleesa's, Tom, and Kathy's comment together. And so really they're wondering, what should the community be supporting? What does PNA want for the neighborhood? Are there ways to make sure that you can improve housing without pricing out some current residents?
So who would like to take, so maybe we can identify
Very different questions.
the question. Yes.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to make sure I get through them all, but yeah, certainly. So let's start with Tom's question. So he was
Okay.
asking about the pricing. So what can neighborhoods do to make sure they're improving housing without making sure that they're not pricing out folks?
Right.
Basically, that sounds like, how do you stop gentrification? That's what that sounds like to me. And I feel like that's something that we have been looking at and struggling with in general, because the more stuff that is pretty and shiny in the neighborhood, the prices go up. But what we're trying to do, I think there are tools that are planning tools that we're trying to use. And I think, Monet, do you want to speak to some of those tools? You're on mute.
You can continue to speak on some of those tools, but I want to talk about, well, go ahead, Ronnie.
I was going to say some of the tools I know are design standards and zoning and things like that. There are ways that you can do that, but then that's a very not regular citizen thing to do. So that's definitely a part of the planning process. And that's something that we're getting to understand. So we're learning about those tools, but we know enough to know that jumping into giant projects or jumping into it head first is not something that's going to be helpful for us. And so we're trying to do it strategically. So I guess that's my short answer. Monet?
So also to add to that, to answer that question, one thing that's so unique about Providence is we have a very large rental rate. And if I'm not mistaken, when we checked back in 2019, we had about a 92% rental rate. And I think one of the things that helps keep us affordable and makes Providence accessible to a lot of people is that we work very hard to build really good relationships with some of our landlords. So not only to make sure that rates are kept affordable and that they know what the community is looking for and what our goals are as an organization, but then also trying to help manage some of those landlord and tenant relationships to where they're not messy relationships. So I know Mr. Doug Douglas, who was one of the founding members of our association, who has since passed. He was an avid member, a very active member in the neighborhood association, but his properties were one of those properties that he wanted to provide affordable housing. So he did. So I also think to where if you are in that situation to where you have rental properties available, I think if there is some sort of like social contract to where that's something that the neighborhood collectively values, then the people who are renting in that neighborhood can also be brought into that. So I think that's one way, is just making sure you have that social contract and that social agreement amongst everyone in the neighborhood, or at least most people in the neighborhood.
Great. So Jalicia asks, any future development plans the community should be supporting?
So I think we are, yes, the short answer is yes. There's always stuff for to support Providence on. We definitely have an active Facebook page. So if you haven't followed us on Facebook, please do so. We'd love to have you looking at the types of items that we're doing, but we are still utilizing our original neighborhood plan. So if you haven't read our plan, you may want to read that. Like it's very clear the things that we're trying to do and accomplish. We had 14 different issues and we're trying to execute all of that from 2003. We're still on that information. But specifically, we are getting ready to go through our planning process. And so when we have these forums during our planning process, we'd love to get outside input. Like we, of course, are going to be engaging with our community, but it's the perspective of the people who can also contribute that we're also looking for. We're looking for pledges of contribution, whether it be monetarily or whether it be socially, or just being proactive with seeking out information and sharing it with us. All of that helps us. And that's how we've always existed. And that's how we look to exist in the future.
Okay, so Kathy notes that PNA is doing a great job. What does the neighborhood most want for Providence now?
Walter, would you like to take that?
Yes. What was the question again? What does the neighborhood want for Providence now?
Yeah, what does Providence most want now?
I think our main concern now would be affordable housing is one of our main concerns. Quite naturally, as the airport gateway is about to come through our neighborhood, that's one of our major concerns. So those are our concerns right now, housing and the gateway.
I want to follow up behind the gateway. I want to say why. When the gateway comes through, there's a possibility of it, taking away housing that we currently have. We have like several of the things that I mentioned, several of our amenities and several of our large housing units are there, like affordable housing for working people, the veterans living situation, all of that is in possibility of change. And so we want to make sure that all the people who may be offset or affected by the gateway have a place to come within our neighborhood. Not that they need to move somewhere else, but that they can come a couple streets over and still have the same familiarity that they have with our community and not have that be interrupted beyond that.
Rosa, I will come right back to your question, but this seems like this question would go perfectly as a follow-up. Max asks, if Providence were to receive a $10 million grant, how would it be spent?
So I think I'll take that question. So if we were to receive a $10 million grant, I think that would look like an investment in affordable housing, not only to preserve the affordable housing that we have, but to increase affordable housing. That would look like investment in our community center to offer additional programs. That would look like improvements to our community garden, which is one of the only fresh food sources in walking distance to our neighborhood. That would look like more public infrastructure, increased sidewalks, improved sidewalks, whatever we could get out of $10 million, we would. But I think that kind of speaks to there's a lot of things that need to happen in Providence, although we are working, but we're always seeking some sort of investment and we're always looking for some sort of improvements as well.
So Rosa is commenting on her experience. So sometimes residents start meeting together and share ideas, but it quickly dissipates. What do you think is the special sauce that keeps the Providence residents together working for so many years on common goals?
Ooh, I want to speak to that one. I love that idea of special sauce. For me, the special sauce was, it's definitely, like, as Walter mentioned before, it's relationships. I think that is what is unique about Providence, is that we have all of our leadership still in the mix. Like, it's not a matter of following, okay, this is your time and now you get to leave. We're all still here. And the reason why we're all still here is because we didn't go through what a lot of organizations go through, which is strife. And I think our strife is really comes from our culture. We come from a culture of consensus. We come from a culture of respecting our elders. We come from a culture of communicating and listening to each other. And when we do that, then we end up with a community an organization that reflects the community, and then we're able to continue our mission. So that's one aspect. The second aspect, I think, is having a written plan and sticking to it. We haven't had a revision in a very long time, but as we look to revise, I don't anticipate much really changing, again, just the way that we execute it. And that's because our focus is still the same. And what that means is that individually, what I want may not be what is in the plan. And that's very separate. We have to balance each as humans, what I personally want versus what's going to be best for the community, because that's what we're in, is a community. Like, I may want X, but if Y is best for the community, then that's going to be my points of advocacy. And I think everyone who's involved in Providence is willing to do that, willing to look at what's going to be best for us collectively. Special sauce.
So Eric asks, he says, earlier you talked about Providence being a walking community in reference to engagement. Amidst the COVID-19 pandemic, Do the leaders of Providence see engagement platforms used by the community changing?
You mean, have they changed, or do we want them to change? I mean, I think it's really tough because everyone has moved to Zoom, but not everybody has Zoom and not everybody has that computer access. And so we are fortunate to know that in the pandemic, if we were masking and social distancing, that your possibility of transmitting or getting COVID is, much lower. We're still able to interact as we have in the past, just with more safety. But I think it's tough because I don't know that our community is necessarily technologically moving towards the things that other people have changed to.
Ronnie, you can also talk about your social media presence, which I think was established, before the pandemic took hold.
Okay, Monet, but Monet wants to say something too.
Yeah, and I also think when it comes not just to kind of the information that we're putting out for our residents, I also think one of our key pieces, especially as an association that believes in advocacy for those who may not have as much access and wealth as we do. So I do see those engagement platforms changing and how we engage our residents changing, because we've had to do a little more legwork in regards to just getting out in the community, posting more frequently and making ourselves more available, but also making sure that we advocate and say, hey, a lot of our residents don't have internet. Maybe y'all should still be sending out things via mail, or maybe you should be hosting it this way or that way, or maybe putting some flyers up on our buses or passing it out at the supermarket, or not the supermarket, but at the gas station that's on the corner. So making sure that not only our engagement increases, but the way that our community is engaged by other people is also and advocating for that is also as equally important.
I would say though that we definitely are using social media more. So for sure, even tonight when we were talking about, like, even in having this event, sending it out and having people be able to come, what has changed is that we can pack in a lot more communications into a digital world. So I can go from meeting to meeting to meeting and not have to drive from place to place in order to, do a little bit more advocacy for the community. But in terms of like the people, we are posting on Facebook more, we are sharing more. And it was prior to the pandemic, we definitely were a social media crew, but you have to catch that where you can, because some organizations do not have people who are social media savvy. And we are lucky that we're sort of in the middle of those generations where we can do that.
So I'm going to get through as many questions as we can. So Nathaniel has a data question. And so he is wondering about the difficulties of being able to provide performance measurement data for helping neighborhood associations when there is no past data. What do you do? Are there some tricks or some techniques?
So in terms of, I think, community-based data, a lot of it is from the ground up, where we actually have to go and collect that information. It is essentially primary data collection, right? Whether it's a health impact assessment or a broader community survey. And the benefit of that is that you're starting to build the data for that community that is then owned or sort of like managed by the community. But it takes a lot of legwork. You have to have the capacity to do so. Otherwise, you're either working with very old data or non-existent data, and sort of the analysis and the policies that come from very spotty data probably wouldn't necessarily reflect what the conditions are, what the exact existing conditions are, and then sort of, guide what the future priorities should be for the community because of those data gaps. So we try as a class, and I can't necessarily speak to what the city does in terms of data collection and curation, but at DERP, we're trying to get the students on the ground, go door to door, collect as much information, not necessarily just for one specific project, but to build out that database for community information so that it can be used for future projects.
So Julie has a great question. So she says, thank you. This was very informative. When you, Monet, spoke about not approaching communities from a deficit perspective, can you talk a bit more about how to do this in practice, especially given the university's power and privilege?
So I'll just go back to a little bit what Walter was talking about earlier when he was talking about FSU primary health. So I do think I think you can recognize someone's weakness and you can recognize some opportunities for growth and betterment without thinking that, oh, I'm going to come in and everything's just going to be better because of my presence type of thing. So FSU Primary Health is one of those good partners who came in and they did the research to where they saw that the southwest side of Tallahassee didn't necessarily have access to medical treatment like they should, that there was kind of just less performance in that area or less just access to that in the area. But then also what they did is when they came to us, it wasn't like, oh, we're your new doctors now. Dr. Van Der May said, how can we help you all? But in a way of like, not only how can we help you all, like what services would you like to see and what would you like to come out of this in a year from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, but also, can you help us in a sense of saying more along the lines of, what can you help us in more of the lines of line of what should this look like? So we were able to provide insight in regards to what would make their practice better, what would be ways that they would better reach our communities, just some of that insight that we had so they didn't. So it was more of a collaboration versus them just saying, this is what we have and we don't know if it's going to work for you all or if it's a good fit, but here it goes because it's better than having nothing. So I think that's something that you can kind of work out is when you see, okay, well, we value this community and the insight that they have. So we're going to work on that, what they have existing and build upon it. So whatever product we put in the community, whatever service we put in the community is going to be the best fit.
Thank you. So Paula asks, what are some of the techniques that seems related? What are some of the techniques you can utilize to build trust within communities? And this might be aimed at you, Dr. Holmes.
Well, Paula, you've taken my class and you were part of one of these processes. And I think it is taking the time to meet with the community members, meet them where they are, going to their homes, meeting with the neighborhood association and spending time, having those, as Walter talked about, having those personal connections and repeated encounters and personal connections in a way not to say, well, I'm only doing this to get something from you, but I'm doing this so that we can get to know each other, because we understand that if we're going to get into this this partnership, we have to get along. We have to know what your priorities are. We have to know what your passions are, what motivates you. So really sort of getting to those personal connections and starting from there, I think is one of the ways that you can set up an environment where you say, okay, I think I'll be able to trust this person. So connecting with those leaders first, and then having the leaders introduced, if you're sort of an outsider from the community, introduce you to the broader community. And we saw that definitely when we were doing the door-to-door surveys, if you remember that. A lot of the times when we were going door to door, no one would open the door if we were by ourselves, if the students were by themselves, right? They only opened if Walter was there with us or Ronnie was there with us, right? So having that representation from leadership that sort of vets and says, okay, this person is has been vetted and wants to support the community and help the community as opposed to take things from the community. I think that went a long way. And that varies from person to person, right? By community member to community member. The community is not a monolith, and sort of the strategies will change depending on what environment that you're working in. I think when we went to the veterans home, right, it was a very different strategy that was employed versus working with the homeowners. So you have to sort of like feel out and listen to the leadership who know the community and the different components and segments of the community to say what strategies would work best to do outreach. But oftentimes it's alongside with the leaders, the trusted leaders and representatives in those communities.
So I'm going to only take two more questions because we're running a little over. Ryan wonders, is there ever an exception where serving in the best interest for a community is met by opposition? What do? Do you follow your own intuition if you're not able to convince the public?
That's an interesting question. I don't know if I can answer that specifically, but I did want to talk about the surveying just briefly from maybe from the other question as well. I will say that sometimes when you do your own studies or surveys on your own, those can be very beneficial later on. I know somebody did a survey without us knowing anything about it in regards to how many people were just walking up and down the sidewalk. It was, I don't know what that was, but there was just a study. And so someone did a study for their schooling or their stuff. And then later on, when people were talking about who needed sidewalks, we had evidence that we were able to find that said, oh, here's somebody who did a study about how many people are walking up and down the sidewalks. So when they said, well, oh yeah, Providence doesn't need sidewalks, we had data that we could bring in and say, this data says we do. So I'm really not sure about how perhaps that data could be contentious. Like I don't, that might be problematic. Maybe you're surveying the wrong thing, or maybe you're looking at it with the wrong language. I'm not sure, because the scope really, to me, is important in how you're framing it. So maybe that needs to be readjusted.
So Ronnie, I think the word was serving. Is there ever an exception with serving in the best interest for a community is met by opposition? So essentially like you're kind of serving the best interest for the community, but the community doesn't necessarily want.
It can't, that's not possible. If okay, so that's a different answer altogether. If you think it's in the best interest of the community, but they're not okay with it, then there's something wrong with what you're doing.
I think a question, and I'll just phrase this or direct this to Ryan, and this is just something for you to self-reflect on. I think a question that you need to ask yourself is who is opposing you? Is your own community members opposing you? Or is it, say, another agency or a partnership? And I say this for myself because I haven't been involved in Providence as long as any other person on this panel has. And there are times to where, say, there may be things that I personally disagree with, but also since we work off of consensus, I have to say, okay, well, I may not personally agree, but the community feels that this is in the best fit, or this is the best interest of the entire community. I have to say, okay, Monet, set your personal opinions aside and you support and you advocate for what the community wants. So if you're facing opposition within your own organization, that may just be a time for a little bit of self-reflection. And ask yourself, are you serving you or are you serving the community as a whole?
Before I ask the last question, Lucia said, I missed the first part of this. Will you be posting this recording somewhere? Yes. So College of Social Sciences and Public Policy has a YouTube channel, and you will be able to go there and view this probably tomorrow afternoon. So it'll be posted there and you can view it at your own leisure. So Alana asks, she says, Ronnie, I love your perspective on your takeaway about mutually beneficial partners and relationships. What has been the most effective way to support your partners openly and socially from the PNA perspective?
Most effectively, social media. Regardless of what you're doing, if you can do a post, if you can do something that showcases stuff, then you're doing a couple of things. You're documenting it, and you're also giving something, you're leaving your track. And so by doing that, you're allowing other people to say, oh yeah, this is something they do, or this is something that I'd like to be involved with. I worked in radio for a while, and basically we would tell clients that it's going to take at least six weeks for your advertisements to work, because it's 6 points of contact before people start to really understand or really remember that you're doing X, Y, and Z. So the more that you put things out there, the better off that is in terms of what you're looking at. So same for them. Like if people can constantly look at your page or see themselves on your social media, then they're going to remember you a bit differently. And that's something that you actually have control over and that you can curate. So I'm just a fan of that in particular. So that's photos, videos, whatever posters and flyers you have. All of that information is something that you're going to want to capture and keep, yeah. So that's my answer.
As if you, just in case you didn't see it in the chat, you can link, there's a link to the Facebook page. So you can go and navigate to that now. We went a little over for those of you that hung in with us. Thank you so much. I want to sincerely thank Mr. Harris, Mr. McDonald, Ms. Moore, and Ms. Wright for joining us this evening. Not only do I appreciate all the work that you do, but I am so glad that you were able to come and share your experiences with us. So thank you for taking this time to spend with us and help educate us about what is happening in our community. And of course, Dr. Holmes, thank you for putting all this effort in to moderate this great conversation. And of course, the work that you're doing in the community and at the valuable work you're doing at FSU. Thank all of you for joining us. We really appreciate you spending your evening or an hour of it with us. We hope that you will join us again. Please always go to our college website to learn about future events. Have a wonderful night. Thank you so much. Bye.